Hi, everybody. My name is Melanie Escher, and I'm with the Arizona Telemedicine Program. And welcome to today's program, Changing the Paradigm: Who Tells Our Story Shapes Our Destiny. I've got a few little slides to go through before we get started. Those of you from the University of Arizona, University of Arizona College of Medicine Tucson, faculty, residents, fellows, comm staff, here is the DEI credit URL, and I will also post the URL in the chat when I'm done. And I have another slide with this QR code. So if you want to take out your phones, take a quick picture of it, and you can log in to get your DEI credit. So welcome to the series, Improving Access to Quality Medical Care webinar series. And it's put together by the Arizona Telemedicine Program, the Southwest Telehealth Resource Center, and the National Reach Coalition, and the University of Arizona Mel and Edith Zuckerman College of Public Health. So we respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. Again, welcome everybody in the Southwest Telehealth Resource Region, any other HRSA grantees, and all of our participants today. When you joined the webinar, the phone or your computer mic was muted. There's going to be time for questions and answers, but use the chat function today, please. There's also a post-webinar survey that is populated in the background when you joined. So when you're done, please go ahead and answer those questions. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our website. The URL is on this slide, and again, I will post that into the chat when I'm done. If you have any technical issues, we do have some Zoom help center, and you can also call 520-626-6978 and leave a voicemail if you're having an issue. I'll go ahead, please check our website for upcoming webinars. We do have another webinar of this series next Tuesday, and it is another community group that we'll be focusing on. Please go to our website and you can get registered for that. And again, the survey is very valuable. Your opinion is valuable to us. Please go ahead and fill that out when we're done. And we have one more slide with the QR code for the University of Arizona folks. And this is 1.5 hours of DEI credit. And without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Charmaine. And Charmaine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Melanie. Appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. The National Reach Coalition is really proud to present today's webinar. It's one in a series that we kicked off last April 2021. Who tells our story shapes our destiny. We do this along with our partners, the Arizona Telemedicine Program at the Southwest Telehealth Resources Center, the Department of Health Promotion Sciences at the University of Arizona's Mel and Enid Zuckerman College of Public Health, and the National COVID Resiliency Network at Morehouse School of Public Health. Today's webinar focuses on the Asian American Pacific Islanders community and their work to own and tell their story, reclaiming any and all parts of their story that may have been taken on by others who sought to tell it as they saw fit and not as the community wanted their story told. Their effort to own their history, confront oppressive structures, and promote and support the healing and resiliency of their community by doing so. The outcome of this is an AAPI community that is the author of their own destiny. Many of us know that in the last 3 years, many in the AAPI community have spent time during COVID wrestling the stories being told about their community from national leaders and their followers who are pushing a very negative narrative, which in many cases had devastating impact and implications for many in the AAPI community. And that's why today's webinar is in part a celebration of the advocacy and the agency that this community has demonstrated in making sure that they tell their stories, that they own their stories, and not have anybody else attempt to tell it for them. And with that, we are going to introduce our panelists that we are particularly happy to have with us this afternoon, where we have three panelists: Ange Hwang, who is the Executive Director of Asian Media Access; MaryAnne Riodique, who is a Regional Director, Business and Educational Partnerships at the Northwestern Arizona University; and Pakou Xiong, who's Grants Manager at the Minnesota Department of Health. We're going to first ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, give us a bit of their background, their work, and then afterwards, we're going to ask them to respond to a series of questions. So, Angie, would you kick off the introduction? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Angie. I'm the Executive Director with Asian Media Access. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join this webinar. And Asian Media Access in Minnesota has been serving Asian American and Pacific Islander community for the past 30 years. We have been very lucky, really grounded in very diverse Asian culture in Minnesota, but at the same time, we really have a cohesive front to represent AAPI in Minnesota. And during the COVID, Asian Media Access has been very actively supporting to really providing accurate, timely information to our communities. And at the same time, we're really starting to involve more at the cash relief, at the food support, and vaccination clinics. So a very diverse and very energetic agency I'm in, and I'll share more with you later. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. MaryAnne?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm MaryAnne Riodique. I work with Northern Arizona University, focused on working with community partnerships to expand educational attainment throughout Arizona. I was invited to this session from my good colleague, Martha, because my research recently really focused on telling the stories of Filipino Americans from their own lens, and taking empowerment from that. So I think that it was, incredibly important with the topic of this webinar and seeking empowerment from owning the narrative, owning the storytelling from the communities. And so that was what my dissertation work focused on. So I'm happy to represent both the AAPI community and also from, the diverse perspectives from different ethnic groups from within the AAPI umbrella as well, and unpacking the stories even from within the ethnic groups within.
Thank you, MaryAnne. And Pakou?
Hello, everyone. My name is Pakou Xiong. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm a first-generation Hmong American refugee. My personal and professional background and experience is focused on community engagement and health equity. So I'm currently a grants manager for the COVID-19 Cultural Faith and Disabilities branch with the Center for Health Equity at the Minnesota Department of Health. And currently my role supports the Minnesota Department of Health's COVID-19 response with diverse communities in Minnesota, really working with, in partnership with diverse communities, communicating with and engaging those diverse communities most impacted by the inequities around COVID-19 messaging. And I'd like to thank the host for inviting me to be a part of today's panel and share my thoughts with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Pakou. So for the benefit of those attending, the questions that we are going to ask the panelists to respond to, we have them organized in different categories. So our first set of questions addresses the COVID experience. And then we talk about a bit of history, the impact of stories and the power they have, and then lessons learned and shared. There are, however, times when their questions may not stay closely in that category. And as many of you who have attended webinars know, there are times when questions that are not there for the panelists, but based on the discussion, the conversation that comes up, it generates new questions. So with that being said, I'm going to ask the first question, and that has to do, I'm going to ask Angie, maybe if you would start us off with the responses. So did you find that your community's experience of COVID-19 was being told by others in a way that was not fully reflective of the community's experience? Angie?
Yeah, that is a good question. As AAPIs, I think we have across the nations, our community has a very high vaccination rate. In Minnesota, particularly, a lot of times we even see is the number tip over 100% because a lot of Wisconsin's members may come to Minnesota to get vaccinated. So it looks really great. The AAPI community has more than 90% of vaccination rate. So that's really is a mainstream type of the story. But for us, we really hear a lot of a different kind of stories for our seniors. For example, so we talk with our seniors, hard to reach groups. A lot of my senior, for example, one of the seniors told me, I don't need vaccines. I know eating chicken poop will prevent me to get COVID. So that's one statement. So another one will say to me is, no, I feel so bad. I will so afraid of needles. Why can't we just have waiting for the natural immunization? So all these different stories coming up, and it never get covered at the mainstream media, nor it has been really widely discussed because the number is good, but really did not take into account of a lot of time AAPI communities not have enough or reflective census tract counts, nor we are been seeing as a silent group a lot of times. So our culture in some ways teaching us not to speak up, to respect the authority, to respect the harmony, don't rock the boat. So a lot of time we're not seeing us to be representative. The last one is a lot of time our community, they really support one another, which is a strong resilience. But the way we support each other is in a much more silent way. So we don't really stand up and say, this is our narrative. We will hope to reflect the narrative in all different directions, some of the subculture, some of the hard to reach groups, and some of the times we really hope our story is coming from our own communities.
Thank you, Angie. MaryAnne? You're muted, MaryAnne.
Thank you. I was just going to say that a lot of that is what's not being said, like what Angie was saying, is just this silence in our communities, and particularly healthcare workers, where there's a strong contingent of Filipinos, both in nursing, but here in Arizona as well, lots that work in low wage jobs in the nursing homes and in those facilities. And so I know that during the COVID-19, especially during, the most difficult months of it, those were especially hard for the frontline workers, but those narratives aren't highlighted or mentioned in the media. And like Angie was also saying, it's also not a practice within our community to bring attention to the plight, even though those are individuals that were suffering in silence in those roles. So if that's anything that I could say, is just the silence and lack of narrative around that.
Thank you, MaryAnne. Pakou?
Yeah, I agree with what Angie and MaryAnne had shared, but also want to add from the Minnesota Department of Health working in partnership with the diverse communities here, and especially with our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. We've really built strong partnerships, and in being a partner in being able to share some of those amazing stories that have been successful in the community. So, for example, the Center for or the Culture, Faith, and Disabilities branch here at Minnesota, at the Minnesota Department of Health, came together because of, the concerns about COVID, and learning about our families in Asia who are getting COVID, and so the Cultural Faith and Disabilities branch came together with diverse staff across MDH to put together this group of skilled staff to work with community organizations. And so we have been really successful in building those partnerships and really having the API communities show MDH the way of how to connect and communicate with community as appropriate.
Thank you, Pakou. MaryAnne, both you and Angie in particular mentioned in your first responses about the silence, the silence of many in the communities. And I wondered if you would pick up on that thought in response to this question. With that community silence, how will the communities ensure that the authentic story of their experiences with COVID be told now and be there for the future?
I think it's a challenge for a lot of our community organizations. Mm-hmm. It's a challenge for us as a community to normalize more activism and in ways that can be comfortable for a lot of people to participate in. Social media has been a big help in, kind of elevating a lot of those stories, and it democratizes that process a lot, I think. But even political activism, that's an area that the AAPI community needs to improve upon, I think. And I think this is a call for us to be more active, to ensure that local politicians and government leaders pay attention to our community as one of the fastest growing ethnic groups. It is shocking just how it feels like we have relatively little clout in terms of politics, even though our numbers are growing. And that, I think it's a call out for us to just get more active.
Yeah. Besides, MaryAnne has mentioned this political activism, but I do think our culture really have a different kind of resilience. So may not be at the mainstream so clearly political involvements, get a voice at the media. We really have a lot of community trusted messengers. For example, we have our monk from Thai Temple who take the first step to get the vaccine, so our members can follow, or some of those community leader, which is in some way is the cultural storyteller who stand up and they don't know how to do social media from their perspective, but they starting some of the Facebook Live to share those information with members who trusted them. So we see all these different kind of leaders really step up to share the information and really help our own community. So in some ways, our resilience really supporting our Asian American and Pacific Islander community is just unfortunately, as MaryAnne has been talking about, we have not crossed that message to the mainstream. So we always ended up being shaped the narrative by others, not by us. So as an Asian Media Access, we starting to take really active stand to videotaping testimonies, so from our leaders and in their own languages. And we share the stories also from the normal people and to really in their own languages as well. So our young people particularly, they stand up and when we get the heights within COVID, they are not just learn how to produce video, produce postcard, produce animations. They produce those things in their heritage language and share within their own circle. So I think really is important for us to realize we have that resilience within our own community. And now we really need to bring it up to the next step to really change that narrative for the society at large, to that others to hear our stories firsthand, but at the same time, really keep it up with that advocacies MaryAnne has been talking about. If any decisions made for us cannot do it without us. Our community has to start realize and really has to reach out. So it's a two-way street.
Angie, if I could stay with you a minute, just because of your role and the organization you're with in, Asian Media Access, and ask you what has been done or what plans are there for organizations like yours to take up this responsibility of making sure that the stories that the AAPI community, that their stories and their experience in COVID really gets captured and is captured now, and as I mentioned, captured for the future. So if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, Asian Media Access has a starting, because of the COVID, we're starting to realize we cannot just stay at the national level. Anything CDC told us, we'll say it. No, we have to really starting to framing the story so our community can understand. A lot of times, some of the CDC information will be very straightforward, very in some way, very logic thinking. So, is this A, create disease? So B, next step is take the vaccine. So for our community, we really communicate in a very different way. Instead of having this large models, A lead to B lead to C, so therefore we get vaccine, our community is very high context. They are really immersed in the environment. So in some ways, they receive it. The reason for them to get vaccine is not because of their own health, but it's because their children's health, because the seniors' health. And that's what we do it all together to protect all us as a collective response. And that type of collective response have not shared widely with others. So a lot of time we see those vaccination messages to say, go get vaccine, protect your own health. But in some way, we want to say, protect our health. So as a agencies, as a media agency, we starting a Asian Pacific Minnesotan TV channel. So we just feel like we need to bring some information, localized information, but at the same time, the information has to build on the cultural context. Sometimes we are taking longer. So instead of to spend 30 minutes as the public service announcement, which the mainstream used to, it takes us 2 minutes to really get the story told. We need to build the context and then share as an immersion experience for our audience. So it's a very different way storytelling. And at the same time, we feel we are the best messengers because we are living in this biculture. We integrate the information from the mainstream and share with our community in a cultural context.
Thank you, Angie. I have a question that Pakou, I want to start off with you with the next question. With COVID, there was an immense loss, right? A loss particularly of many of our older generation, those who have kept the stories, particularly for immigrants. What has been the experience in the APAC community around the loss of those who were the holders of the stories for the community?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I think there is immense loss, especially I can speak from the Hmong community. The Hmong community have been in the United States since the end of the Vietnam War, probably I think close to 40 years now. And a lot of our seniors have passed away, and those that who are still living have gone through this COVID experience. And so in the Hmong culture, and similarly to many other ethnic cultures, we are oral culture, right? We share stories from generations to generations. And, I think a lot of the impact has been due to our the lifestyle of living in America. We don't have a lot of that times to talk and spend together like how it used to be back in the mother countries, right? And so I think a lot of that has, the lifestyle in America has, increased that, having those oral stories being shared and told through our seniors, and also, having, of course, the loss through the COVID experience. And so definitely there has been a lot of loss there.
Is there a push to try and is there a heightened sense of the need to get those stories down, especially because there's been the loss of elders who were the keepers of the story? Is there a push? Pakou or anybody else for that matter?
I'll follow up with what Pakou has said. In Minnesota, a lot of when the COVID first started, we really lost a lot of community leader at my generation, 50, 60 years old. Definitely is that historical moments really have not been able to capture. But at the same time, one of the factor we will see is our seniors has relived, not just because of COVID, just because that scarcity of food and people really trying to grab everything they could from the shelf. And they relive that refugee experience tremendously. Mentally, they are suffer even more. So that's what we feel is that type of factors combining make our community seniors has weaker immunization to really support them going through this COVID. That traumatic experience as a refugees, fighting for resources, worry every day where you're going to get food. And they even starting a group in the Facebook to say, hey, I find the toilet paper at a supermarket, and all the community member will rush to go there to buy. Those type of stress, anxiety, plus some of the us being called China virus. We have a community member, the front yard got sprayed with chemical, and you can see those chemicals spray, the grass won't grow, and you see the word China virus on the lawn. So this type of the immigrations, refugee escaping experience, anti-Asian hate experience really accumulated. And for us, we really facing a triple crisis. And so not just COVID. So that really put our community in such a devastating stage. And at the same time, this type of story have not been told.
Great. Thank you, Angie. I don't know, MaryAnne or Pakou, did you want to comment before we follow up on the next one? Pakou?
Yeah, I think in response to your question, if there's a push to have these stories documented or recorded, I think in smaller pockets of some API groups, there are some efforts being done. I know, especially like in the Hmong community, there are some efforts and groups who are trying to document some of the stories that were experienced, especially through our seniors during COVID. And one of my grantees, they're actually working on some of those stories. So I would say yes.
Thank you, Pakou. So I'm going to go on to another question, sort of looking backwards in the history. And I know that I've seen several, and many of us have seen several reporting on the TV in response to the Asian hate crisis. Many on public television and others have gone back and provided some historical context of the many AAPI communities in this country and their history. And so my next question to you all is, has there been a history of racism that has distorted the community's story? And if so, how? And anybody, feel free to start off.
So for definitely some of those historical trauma moments, such as the Japanese internment camp, such as the refugee escaping experience, such as the Vincent Chan hate crime, I think our community has been seeing all these traumatic moments, and now we're adding on this COVID. A lot of times our community has sharing this story internally. For example, we will say, don't take this classes, for example, at the university. This professor is so-and-so. So we share a lot of those tips to help the next group will not be suffering all these hate and all these historical trauma experience. But at the same time, we have not come together as a united front to share those Asian American and Pacific Islander experience. We have a lot of subcultures, and we definitely support a lot of heritage cultures, experience, and language needs. But at the same time, I will also want to call for a unified front to responding to those historical trauma moments. And we just celebrate, we shouldn't say celebrate, memorize Vincent Chan's 40 years anniversaries in Detroit last year. And this really is a great communal collective experience, and recognizing how the hate crime really put our Asian American at the target and how our communities suffer. And through one person's story, and see how the families remember him, and see how his mother ended up give up the citizenship go back to China, and impact the whole entire, not just his family, that generation. We just feel that type of story need to be told by Asian American community leaders, and particularly for a lot of media work we've been involved. And we keep saying we want to have this documentary for Vincent Chan after 40 years, but this is only 2 or 3 documentations made for this historical cases. So we would really hope is having a wider discussion with our community, incorporate with this historical trauma experience, and reflecting what is current status for Asian American. And we definitely have a long way to go, but at the same time, we feel each subcultures has sharing a lot of those stories internally. And that's how we build our own resilience. And now it's a time to bring the story to the front.
Thank you. MaryAnne or Pakou? Again, the question is the history of racism and the distorting of the community's story.
Yeah, I mean, I think my opinion about the history of racism in the API community may differ from others. I feel that racism is different at different levels. As Angie had mentioned, there's many unique API cultural groups. And, you know, for example, my Hmong community may not be able to relate to the same racism as the Chinese community, right? But, you know, and also not every community has the thought or the idea of, oh, this is racism, because it may not be a taught process or something that's taught in their culture, or, you know, it's just more of like a dislike, you know, versus the big word of racism. So, for example, if I go to a store and I see a white guy who won't give me what I want, you know, maybe I don't know that that is racism. I just see that as the white guy doesn't like me, right? And so I see at different levels, you know, being a refugee is, you know, a different mindset than being an immigrant or someone who was born in America, right? An Asian American or an Asian person born in America. And so I see from my point of view, racism is different at different levels for different lived experiences among the API cultural groups.
Good, thank you, Pakou. My next question, as I alluded in my opening comments, and I think some of you also alluded in some of your comments, we've had this push by several in power to negatively think about how people think or perceive the members of the Asian community, and many of them don't even distinguish, which Asian community they're talking about. They're lump everybody in and have been quite disparaging about the community. And so the question that I have is, how have the versions of your story told by powers that be affected the outcome of your community's health, if any? MaryAnne?
Well, I think that this, the idea that, the model minority myth that's applied towards the AAPI community masks a lot of the social issues that are prevalent, and that, some of it can be very unique and, amongst the different ethnic groups within our community. And that's masked when you put us all under one umbrella, the idea that, Asian Americans have a high degree attainment, they have high household income, but that needs to be unpacked, by group, generationally and regionally, for you to really understand the realities of our communities. In some regions, there are AAPI communities where the household income and degree attainment is very low. I mean, I know that amongst Filipino Americans, degree attainment is lower than other AAPI groups. And this question in the chat about multi-generational households, yes, you'll find 3 generations in a household, and the income level in that household it might appear, above national average on paper, but when you have 3 generations living under one roof, that's not a wealthy household. So, those details that need to be unpacked from the data about our community, not many people know about. And so this model minority myth about they're wealthy, this trope about wealthy Asians, or everyone goes to college on a scholarship, everyone can get into a selective college. Those tropes really hurt us in our community when we try to bring attention to the issues that face our communities.
Very interesting.
MaryAnne, you also mentioned during the COVID, we have a very high mortality rate for Philippine nurses. Can you expand a little bit and how that story have never been shared widely?
I haven't done as much research on it, but amongst Filipinos, the stacked comorbidities about high blood pressure, diabetes, and all of that, coupled with stress, I think, in the nursing profession. In my work in higher ed, I once worked with a school where we worked with nurses in the Bay Area, and as a high percentage of Filipino nurses. And we were recruiting during COVID, and just the stories that we would hear of, and not just unique to Filipino nurses, certainly, but just the shifts and the work that they felt like that they had to do, and the pressure and stress of living in a multi-generational household, often being the only breadwinner in the household. I think those factors coupled together, don't make for positive health outcomes, certainly for nurses during that time.
Yeah, and some of our Asian small restaurants also really suffer tremendously. Not just the hate crime, people refuse to go to the Chinese restaurant, for example, just saying you guys are virus. And even for one of the, for example, in our noodle shop, for Vietnamese noodles, pho, you really is you cooking the noodles, and then you put the raw meat on top, and you pouring a very high temperature boiling soup onto the soup, and then the beef will become tender. So when you do the takeout, one of our Vietnamese restaurant got complained because one of the client to show is, here is the raw beef, here is the noodle, here is the soup. And they were just saying in their Facebook to say that restaurant is so sloppy. They are lazy. They are not even cook the beef when I order it. So that is so strictly such a cultural misunderstanding. But that story got picked up. So they got checked, and the health department really say, hey, this is not the way to do it, until the Vietnamese owner has to explain that's how the pho is made, and then how that should be able to place on the noodle and then boiling soup oil on it. So the noodle would be the best timing to eat it, and very tender beef. But that type of the cultural misunderstanding has been amplified during this hate crime crisis. But then what is traditional way of serving food has not been shared. And that is type of the cultural misunderstanding, and really have that ripple effects, and heavily really devastating our Asian small restaurant business. So even in Minnesota, one of the Kiefer Court, for example, is one of the 39 years existence has to close their door. So those type of stories, we really need to pushing it out and understanding we have a very unique cultural impact by the COVID.
Yeah, that's a great example of cultural misunderstanding or misinformation, Angie. I also want to add, in terms of the community health, and going back to what Angie had shared earlier about our community's resilience, in working in the healthcare field and community, there are not a lot of reports or stories or information about Asians seeking Western system healthcare. I think most of the time the Asian communities will seek their own traditional healthcare first, and then seek Western healthcare second or later on. And I know this for a fact, working as a Hmong culture consultant for the region's hospital stroke center. The stroke center found that the Hmong community stroke rate was high, and the community, the patients were getting stroke at a younger age than compared to the white people. And so, and what we found was that, well, there's a fear of medical bills that they were not going to be able to pay. There's the resilience of I'm just gonna take this on, even though it might be a stroke, right? Because if you have stroke, you need to get to the hospital as soon as possible, or seek care as soon as possible. But they might say well, it's just a pain that I'm gonna just deal with it. I'm gonna take some time or take this herbal medicine to see if it will lessen. And some of those things have really, some of those cultural practices or cultural thinkings have really, I would say, delayed some of, or I guess had caused a more negative than positive outcomes for our communities. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that, because we don't have a lot of studies that are focused specifically on, Asian American Pacific Islanders in regards to our community's health.
That's a great point, Pakou. And I wonder how should the those of our nation's premier research institutions, the National Institute of Health, and those, what kind of advocacy needs to happen so that there is a better understanding of how people in the AAPI community respond to the health crisis, and how that the culture, understanding the culture and how it needs to be appreciated as they think of rolling out or learning, expanding their research so they pull in the AAPI community.
Yeah, I mean, I've had these types of conversations before in having more disaggregated data, without lumping all Asians together, because, stroke is high in the Hmong community, but it may not be high in the Chinese community, for example. This is just an example. So then, even though there's a need in the Hmong community and maybe not a high need in the Chinese community, when we lump all those things together, it's like, oh, looks like the AAPI community doesn't really need a lot of support or research for stroke, because they're fine, because once you get 0 and 10 and you average it, it's like 5, right? It's an average. And so I definitely think there should be more disaggregated data and funding, to support this. Even I have advocated for some of this, even at like the healthcare provider level. It's still all lumped together. When that in particular, you may have a in a certain geographic area. So for example, in Minnesota, we do have like a much higher Hmong community. There needs to be a checkbox for Hmong, or there needs to be a checkbox for the Karen community, where there are higher, where you see that there are higher numbers of the AAPI community. There needs to be more focus on that. So, even in like LA, maybe there's, higher Chinese community or higher Korean community. There needs to be those check boxes and not just all lumped together. And the reason why I'm a little bit more passionate and advocating about this is because those disaggregated data or those unique check boxes will only help the institutions in getting more funding or learning more about how to support the unique and diverse communities in their where they live and work. And so that's something that I find it frustrating, especially with the healthcare providers, is they have this standardized demographics form that it seems like it could be easily changed or updated, but it seems like it's such a struggle to climb over that wall to make those change. And I'm not at a level where I can really say, yeah, let's change it. For me, I see it like it's easy, just add these ethnic groups to the list, but I think it's the infrastructure and all that other stuff. It's much more than that. And so I think that change for many larger institutions is maybe they see it as it's too much work or too much money to get that change, and that's why there isn't a lot of change. And it's like, yeah, we'll just keep these groups all together and it's fine, but it's not. In America, it's changing, the demographics are changing, and we have to evolve with that too.
Yeah, Pakou, I think you got a good questions to really support that disaggregation data, but also we need to have that precision medicine research too. So when they first developed the COVID vaccination, a lot of our Asian American families are so worried because we are built differently. We may be maybe the research and the testing for COVID-19 vaccine is at the mainstream community, but Asian community, particularly our children's, they are more petite and they are smaller in size. Were they impacting was same dosage? Was that any impact? was that type of different genes, a different physical build, can the vaccine take it as the same level? So those are the things our community continue asking, but it's really lack of the data, really lack of that precision medicine was really targeting a certain group or really study all the different genes, environmental impacts before we can safely take the medicine. So a lot of our Asian American and Pacific Islander community, they will go along with what the authority tell them so, because we are in that collective culture. So we believe we'll do the best for the group. And a lot of time, Charmaine, when you go back to that, a different kind of communication strategy has to be developed, because for a lot of Asian Americans, we are a high context. We are really putting a lot of information together. We may not directly get to the point. So we won't be able to have, even for the joke, the Western will say, knock, knock, who's there? And then you have your punchline. That's not kind of joke in our community. Our community maybe was swelled. We are building some of those contact before we may not even have a punchline. So that type of communication strategy is so different. So that's what our community may not go get vaccines seriously, because is just passing them. If you don't put that message into contact and immerse our community into understanding the whole situation, and our community prefer to make those decisions in a group setting. So all these things have not been considered when we develop a lot of COVID story for general public. They are just passing through our Asian Americans. So when we started to take the lead and really develop some of the message was the cultural contact, and slow down the pace and providing more background information and really answer some of those questions if they are concerns about the dosage, why it is. But the vaccine is they develop basing on the developmental age. So that's why we have the 6 months old, we have 6 months to 5, 5 to 12, and then 12 to 18, 18 and up, because the dosage is developed basing on the youth developmental stage, not basing on the weight or height of that individual. So when we can explain this to our community, the attitude change and say, oh, good. So that's not because the physical build, it's because we have to take the vaccine based on the different level of the developmental stage. So, but that type of communications, it's not coming out from the mainstream. It's coming out from our Asian American press, from Asian media access, from our Hmong Today. We've been pushing those information out so our community can have the background information and making a better decision. So that type of the different cultural dimension, different cultural communication style have to be taken into consideration, be able to have a successful narrative change for our community.
Thank you, Angie. I want to sort of tie all of what you three have said in this whole theme of storytelling. The Asian-directed hate has led into more visible voices in the Asian community advocating for themselves, right? Pushing back against the hate. Is this an opportunity for the Asian community to seize on, to get out the different stories and points that you are all raising? Pakou, you talked about the fact that not enough research, you and Angie talk about not enough research is known about the Asian community, and there needs to be advocacy around that. Is that an opportunity for the AAPI community to seize on, to start getting their stories out as part of their advocacy for their community to make change happen? What do you think, MaryAnne? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that if anything, especially for our youth that might, feel apathetic, it's definitely kind of a challenge towards identity. And it's a challenge for our community just to, I think that there's a tendency for Asians to just want to work hard and put their head down. And that's how we traditionally look at making it and being successful. But there's a way to engage with our communities that is absolutely necessary, right? We have to show that we're embedded in these communities and not just insulated within, immigrant enclaves or AAPI enclaves or neighborhoods, that we're embedded and invested in, that we're here and our stories deserve to be told. And, we're part of the American fabric, right? And I think that from that narrative, we need to normalize that and just put that out more. And it starts with diverse engagement in terms of civic engagement, not just voting, but getting involved in community organizations. It could be you advocating or creating your own sort of nonprofits or mentoring other AAPI youth and just showing them how else they can get involved. But I think that we need to normalize that more, especially with, even within our more recent kind of immigrant populations where, we're talking first, second generation Asian Americans that are kind of growing up here post-COVID, and, they need to feel like that kind of activism is normalized and part of what it means to be an engaged citizen. So from that perspective, I hope that what we experienced in COVID awakens that in our community.
Do you think that awakening will continue? I see you, Angie, but I wanted to push MaryAnne a little bit. You think that awakening, MaryAnne, will have the level of energy that got started during COVID continued?
That's a good question, right? Because I think that it can be awakened once you're challenged and you feel like there's this adversary and you feel like you have to defend yourself. But there could be a tendency to get complacent again when maybe you don't see those stories of Asian hate on the news anymore. And, there's definitely that danger of becoming complacent again. So certainly, I think that that's kind of the worry with all kind of the youth vote, right? But I think for those of us that are already engaged in the community, that is just kind of a constant push and mission that we have to make sure that the discussion is always kind of pressing towards that as a goal.
Thank you. Angie, I had seen you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. At the national level, we do have a lot of the AAPIs pulling the resources together. For example, one of the initiative involved is the Golden Future, which is pulling in more than $50 million together and to really looking for AAPI's organizations who will boldly, innovatively to come up with the different strategies to support our community. So I think that national level, we definitely see a lot of movements. But I also feel a lot of time, even just for the local community. For example, I work with the Chinese American community when we talk about this anti-Asian hate and China virus, a lot of them really focusing on the cultural understanding. So may not be direct advocacy, may not be involving in politicals, voting or coming up as a candidates, but that community alone, we produce a Taste of Asia. So it's one of the festival, and then they put it together, Asian American Street Food Festival. And then recently we just finished a dance drama about Between Water and Cloud, which is really supporting the post-COVID to go back to a simple lifestyle, a peaceful lifestyle to support all of us. So a lot of our community member has using culture and using arts to really compensate some of those misunderstanding and a lot of gaps between our way of communication and compare with mainstream. Maybe it takes us longer to get that conversations going and get the point across because we don't have that punchline approach. But the community has taken different stands and then really taking on a lot of opportunity, particularly the cultural food is one of the very popular tools, and then using the dance and the music. So we will let other community to come to our cultural contact so they can understand us more. So they can see us not as the China virus, but really see us as similar, a group of excellent communities with excellent arts and dance and cultural background from past 5,000 years for Chinese American. So I feel a lot of times the mainstream would put expectation on our Asian American communities to say you have to go out to vote, you have to participate in the political arena. But a lot of time, our community show resilience in different ways. They are starting the street vendors. They are starting this different kind of festivals. They are putting together a dance drama to really push for Chinese arts and culture and also support a simple lifestyle. So they are using different ways to combat this anti-Asian hates. And that we have to continue to show off and really pushing out to the mainstream narrative and let them see it's not just one way. And Asian American has their own way to immerse our culture with the society at large. And hopefully that dripping water effects will go in soon.
Pakou?
Yeah, I'd also like to add for those who may not be as familiar with Asian American Pacific Islander culture, there's, because there are some AAPI communities who have their own countries, and there has been some other historical relationships that have caused negativity towards those different groups. And also there are ethnic groups who don't have a country, who are ethnic minorities, such as the Hmong community and the Karen community. And so I think to respond to your question, Charmaine, about is this an opportunity to come together and, be active or, do something together? I think the answer would be yes, but, we have to, maybe some of our older generations, they still have that historical trauma of different countries and their ancestors fighting against one another. But if we, the current generation here, look past that and think about, we living in America, how can we come together to be a stronger force together? I think that would be possible. I mean, that would be like my ideal dream, but there are still, many of those historical trauma that still need to be resolved within oneself or one within each unique group, So, but I think there are so many possibilities, and especially with a lot of the, coming together of many unique groups fighting for and advocating for their needs, I think it's always positive possibilities.
Thank you, Pakou.
Thank you.
When we were having our prep session, if you remember, the point was made about a report stating that it was observed that many of the Chinatowns that had been established in major cities or even some smaller cities across the country were disappearing. And I wonder how you view that. Is it a reflection of a good thing happening, that more Asian cultures are being assimilated, more AAPI, cultures are being assimilated, or is there a concern that the disappearance of those Chinatowns and what they meant, both for the inhabitants as well as the cities in which they were located, isn't necessarily a good thing for the stories that those Chinatown represented for their inhabitants and for the people in other communities who went to those Chinatown, to learn of Chinese culture, whether through the food that they ate or through the stores that were there that they purchased from. So any thoughts about what that means, the disappearance of Chinatowns? And I'm sure it's not just Chinatowns, it's the Korean towns, it's those assemblage of particular Asian ethnic groups that held together for decades. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I've heard about those stories about the Chinatowns. I think, in my opinion, I think, yeah, it is a concern when you see that, maybe the LA Chinatown is not as big as it used to be anymore. You would question, like, why are they being successful in moving out of that neighborhood, or is it because of these other issues that are causing them to not be as successful as they once were? And so, I think as a Hmong community member, and I identify as part of the Asian American Pacific Islander community, I do see that we all have in common that collective group, being tied or connected to a person who looks like you, or a person who can relate to you, so even though I'm Hmong, I'm still, my family and I, we still seeking the Chinatowns wherever we go, or the Asian foods wherever we go, wherever we're, whatever we are familiar with, right? To have a sense of belonging and the sense of connectedness. And so, yeah, I would, in my opinion, I do see that as a concern. And, I would want to seek out why there's less of them, or why they don't exist anymore, right? So, yeah.
I think that it's an interesting case of, I think a lot of communities of color and immigrant communities, they grew and thrived in inner cities, in many cities. And now that there's a shift of sort of gentrification, and now those downtown areas are like the prime real estate where the rich want to live. And so I found, especially, having lived in Phoenix for almost 30 years now, is our Asian communities have always just kind of been dispersed throughout the suburbs. And we really haven't had a Chinatown in South Central Phoenix for decades. That's long been gentrified. And it is sad that those buildings and that those businesses and those stories are, I found some of those stories cataloged in the city's archives of the Asian American community. There were Chinese and Filipino establishments throughout South Phoenix. And of course, that's all gentrified now. But I think that it's important that, as cities and their landscapes kind of evolve, that, you know, there is an effort to kind of to educate people about, you know, the histories of our communities in those areas. But I don't know if that's going to change that, you know, gentrification and how those spaces are now corporatized and become prime real estate. But I think that there's a way that our communities can maybe evolve, even if it is in the suburbs. We're seeing that in East Mesa here in the Phoenix area. You know, our Asian Chamber really pushed to have a part of East Mesa called the Asian Arts District. And it is a suburban area, and it's mostly Asian supermarkets, but a lot of the small Asian mom and pops have really kind of popped up around there. So maybe that's a resurgence for us in this kind of a suburban strip mall landscape. But I think that there's a way that it can evolve into something else.
That's a great point. Thanks, MaryAnne. Angie?
Yeah, really agree with Pakou and MaryAnne. This is a cultural destination. It really is the way for people first experience our culture is through Chinatown, through restaurant food. So I feel if we lost that that identity, a lot of time people doesn't know where to experience different culture.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, that also has a significant meaning, continue to say, you guys are foreigners, so that's why you concentrated, you are in one Chinatown area because you are not part of us. So I think those pros and cons will always be there. And we really see a lot of the younger generation has a picking up. They want to keep that cultural destination idea, but they really upgraded. So they upgraded with more modern stores. They upgraded with a different kind, for example, the bubble tea shops you can online order and you can just do pick up. So I feel the cultural destination, it has to be continued to be present so we can really preserve the historical meaning and some of our histories to support the community so far. But at the same time, we have to realize we are part of this larger fabric. So beyond the Chinatown, we really has to also put our footprint in so we can be able to see we are not centralized in a very unique area as foreigner immigrants, but we are part of this fabric and we are everywhere. And that kind of trend, I would say it's much more a positive. So really upgrade our cultural destination image, but at the same time really bring in a lot of new trendy things for our different small Asian American business beyond mom and pop, and then really seeing how can we integrate also with the larger society.
Thank you, Angie. As we're coming towards the end, I wonder if each of you could share your thoughts about the recent lessons learned as members of the AAPI community in terms of owning your stories, not having others decide to tell your stories the way they want to. What are the lessons learned that are useful for other communities? Because yours have been so spotlighted in these last 3.5 years where, you know, as I mentioned earlier, and as you have mentioned, it generated such animosity. But where there was a clear pushback about you don't get to tell us, and you don't get to have paint a target on us because you've decided to tell a story about us that was not true to us. And yeah, so I wondered what lessons you would have from this experience that others could also learn from, that we could learn from.
Yeah, I
I'll
think,
go.
oh, do you want to go ahead, Angie?
Sure.
Go ahead, Pakou. Go ahead.
Go
Sorry,
ahead, Pakou. No, don't worry.
Okay. Well, yeah, my initial thoughts as you were asking that question, Charmaine, is I think lessons learned is really taking the time to have the patience to teach others about who we are as our unique cultural groups. You know, we can identify as, I can say, yeah, I'm Asian American, but I'm Hmong, and that's different than the other Asian groups. To really bring that teaching, that education to many other audiences, so that they know and they understand and they are educated about it. I think sometimes we're like, no, I'm not Chinese, I'm Hmong, and then that's it, you know. So, you know, I think we as a collective AAPI community, we can take that step and say, hey, I'm not Chinese, I'm Hmong, and Hmong is an ethnic group from Southeast Asia. We have our own culture, we have our own language, but and we originated, our ancestors are from China. We may look Chinese, but we are our own different group, you know. So just taking the extra step to educate about who we are as a unique AAPI group, our cultural group. And so I think for me, those are lessons learned that I have been also putting into practice as I meet with different audiences who may not be as familiar with the AAPI communities as I am, right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Pakou.
Thank you.
Just picking up where Pakou said about really reaching out, sharing our culture more. But at the same time, we feel some of the mainstream agencies, and also they need to ask us good questions. So they will not trying to using continually a Eurocentric model. For example, we learn very quickly when we first starting the vaccination, they all has a very limited time, 1 to 1:15. That's your time. If you don't show up on that time, so you lost your spot. A lot of Eurocentric approach, time is money. So that's why we put everything has to be on time. But for Asian cultures, we have the time is circular. It's always coming back. So we may not show up at 1, we may show up at 1:30. So we think that is the time would be okay. But then that type of practices is just blocking, become a barrier for our Asian American community. So ended up we just giving up a 1 to 4 p.m. for vaccination time, just come when you can. So our community come when they feel okay to come. So a lot of time we've been joking, those Asian time, you never be on time, but they come within this block and then they have to wait. And then the Asian Americans, we don't feel wait is something wasting time. When you wait, you chit chat with the person next to you and you share a lot of those life stories. So the waiting is the way to take it easy and you understand that would be fine. So that type of lesson we have to continue to put into the Western system. They have to be flexible, they have to adaptable and also integrated the different cultural implication into the healthcare system. So we can be ready for the next crisis. Otherwise, we'll continue this type of mismatch, and then our community always suffer.
Thank you, Angie. MaryAnne?
I'm sorry, Charmaine, can you repeat the question?
That's fine. No, that's fine. what lessons learned
Okay.
from these last 3 years that you think are important for even other groups?
Mhm. You know, I was inspired to really kind of double down on kind of maybe reclaiming a little bit of my own identity. And so that even routed through my dissertation research and telling the stories of other Filipino American women. But now I also kind of challenge myself to think, like, how can I be more intentional and more impactful in how I advocate for my community. So it's a challenge just to see what more I can do. And I'm emboldened by this, during COVID. And I feel like, we all just kind of went internal, and now I'm just kind of ready to go out there and see how else I can elicit change, or maybe talk to youth or mentor youth to do the same. So that's just personally for myself, how it's impacted me and how I hope to go out there and make an impact inspired by that.
Thank you, MaryAnne. I want to say a huge thank you to you, MaryAnne, to Pakou, and to Ange for a wonderful conversation. From your last thoughts, we learned patience and education are critical to really engaging with people who may not necessarily be sympathetic, but are also aren't always also experiencing animosity towards us. Sometimes it's ignorance, sometimes it requires seeing beyond what they put out and saying, wait, is this just out of ignorance? And is patience and education important? From Ange, I learned, hey, you have to understand culture. We learned you have to understand culture. A perspective that a Eurocentric perspective is not the only perspective to have. And in order for us to learn to cohabit well, we have to have the experience of understanding cultures and how you work with different cultures. And then MaryAnne, you talked about the importance of both being focused inward and then also looking how you then turn and focus outward to make the sort of change that we're looking for. And I think those are great lessons that are not only applicable for the AAPI community, but for all of us who are trying to find and establish our place here. And while we want to, and our ideal is to be part of the American culture, we also are huge advocates for our own stories as part of the American story. And so I want to thank you, all three of you, for helping us further that understanding. So ultimately, we all as citizens make a better America. So thank you so much for your time and your insight and your input. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Melanie?
Again, thank you everybody for joining us today. And you please go ahead and do the evaluation, which is in the background when you logged in, and check our website for next Tuesday's session of this program. And you'll be able to register on our website. Thank you everybody for joining us. And the recording will be up a little bit later today with the URL that I put into the chat. Thank you, everyone.
As always, thank you, Melanie, for all you do to make this, you and your colleagues do to make this possible. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.